Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving deep into a true masterpiece, Pierre Chauderlos de la Close's 1782 epistolary novel, Dangerous Liaisons. We're going to unpack exactly why its mechanics of manipulation still completely captivate us, even over 2 centuries later. Because trust me, this isn't just some dusty old story about wealthy people behaving badly. It's a highly forensic, totally ruthless examination of power, sex, and morality in a society that is literally teetering on the brink of absolute collapse.
Here's how we're going to break this all down today. We'll start with the blueprint for scandal, then look at the players and the game, move on to weaponizing the written word, dive into the psychology of a villain, and wrap things up by looking at why age matters.
All right, let's jump right into part 1, the blueprint for scandal. First, we have to set the stage in the Ancien Regime.
To really get a feel for this brittle, opulent world just before the French Revolution hit, I want you to think about what the poet Charles Baudelaire said about this novel. He said, "If this book burns, it burns as only ice can burn." I mean, wow, that just brilliantly captures the cold, calculated, and systematic nature of the era. We're talking about the dying days of the Ancien Regime, which was a world built entirely on pretense and duplicity. You've got this landed gentry with absolutely nothing better to do than obsess over their social standing and their own personal pleasure. They quite literally turned human relationships into a blood sport.
Now, you really can't understand this story without wrapping your head around the concept of a libertine. Understanding this term is absolutely crucial. Our main characters, they aren't just engaging in scandal for a quick thrill. Not at all. They view libertinism as a hyper-strategic game of dominance. For them, seduction is this supreme art form, and the actual difficulty of the conquest, that's valued way, way more than the physical pleasure itself. At the end of the day, it's all about one thing: power.
Moving on to part 2, the players and the game. Let's take a look at this chessboard of seduction.
Okay, so check out this dynamic because it perfectly sets up the power imbalance we're dealing with here. You basically have 2 apex predators toying with 2 profoundly innocent victims. On one side, we have Merteuil and Valmont. They're former lovers who enter into this incredibly twisted wager. Merteuil wants Valmont to ruin young, naive Cécile right before her wedding night, just as payback against Cécile's fiancé. But Valmont, he's got his eyes on a much tougher prize, the devoutly religious, very married Madame de Tourvel. And just like that, the game is officially on.
Which brings us to part 3, weaponizing the written word. This is where we get into the mathematics of manipulation.
This is wild. If you actually map out the novel's correspondence, it reveals a literal social network. Researchers tracked who was writing to who, and they found that characters with high betweenness centrality, meaning they act as a bridge between other characters, they're the ones who have the ultimate power to manipulate the flow of information. You can visually see the network shift from simple lines of connection into closed triads. And those closed triangles, they represent shifting power dynamics and traps snapping shut as the predators circle their prey.
So I want you to really think about this for a second. How do you seduce someone using only a letter? How can mere ink on a piece of paper completely shatter a person's staunch moral defenses? Because the letters in this novel aren't just for, sharing a quick update. They are deeply performative. They're carefully designed to test resistance, mimic genuine sentiment, and construct an inescapable psychological snare.
The secret sauce here is that the letters are heavily double-coded. Take this one famous scene. Valmont writes what seems to be this tortured, beautiful declaration of platonic love to Madame de Tourvel. But get this, he literally uses a courtesan's bare back as his writing desk to pen the letter. Yeah, the polite aristocratic French is just a mask hiding this malicious, erotic subtext that completely mocks the target while actively securing her downfall. It really forces us to realize just how completely language can be manipulated to create illusions.
All right, let's turn to part 4, the psychology of a villain. It's time to deconstruct the ultimate mastermind, the Marquise de Merteuil.
You see, Merteuil's chilling behavior isn't just random, comic book villain cruelty. It's actually a tragic but completely necessary survival mechanism in the intensely oppressive patriarchal society of 18th century France. Think about it. In a world where a woman's only acceptable roles were wife and mother, Merteuil was forced to split her inner self from the projection she showed society. Her very legitimate anger at being devalued pushed her into a psychological state known in Jungian theory as animus possession.
Basically, she weaponizes a toxic masculine persona, that aggressive, rational yang energy, to beat men at their own game.
She proudly calls herself a self-created woman. But the real tragedy of this psychological armor is that she loses her capacity for any genuine emotion. Actually, the very moment Valmont shows real, tender love for Madame du Tourville, Merteuil views it as the ultimate betrayal of their libertine code. She declares outright war on him, simply because he committed the cardinal sin of actually feeling something.
Finally, let's wrap things up with Part 5, Why Age Matters. We're going to look at what happens when you adapt this scandal for the screen. Modern Hollywood loves a good teen adaptation, right? We all remember 1999's Cruel Intentions. But contrasting that with the 1988 film adaptation of Dangerous Liaisons, the one starring Glenn Close and John Malkovich, shows exactly why the older version is vastly superior. A story about calculated, predatory cruelty really requires mature adults who know exactly the damage they're doing. When you make the characters emotionally stunted high schoolers, you kind of subconsciously know these wealthy kids are just going to wash away their impulsive mistakes and head off to a fancy college. But with older, seasoned conquerors, the psychological warfare is entirely intentional. It's unredeemable, and it's utterly devastating.
Because when the dust finally settles on this game, nobody wins. Literally nobody. Valmont is killed in a duel, but not before he leaks all of Merteuil's letters to the public. The masks finally shatter. Merteuil ends up contracting smallpox, she loses an eye, and her legendary beauty is gone. That outward physical scarring perfectly mirrors her internal moral corruption. She's forced to flee in the middle of the night, completely disfigured and disgraced. The collateral damage is absolute.
I'll leave you with this provocative thought to ponder. When we look at our own highly curated personas today, our text messages, our own digital games of social maneuvering, are we really so different from the French aristocracy of 1782? That uncomfortable mirror is the real reason this 200-year-old masterclass in human manipulation remains so frighteningly relevant today. Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and remember to always keep questioning what you read.